Okay, good evening. And I think we can get started now. All the important people are here, all of you. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Candidate Forum. This forum is run by the League. It's a forum, not a debate. There's no rebuttals or whatever questions you ask, they will answer, and that's their answer. We do have a few rules. We'll begin with a 3-minute opening statement from every candidate. Then we'll take whatever questions you have from the audience. And I have a couple up here that have already filled out questions, so we'll try and work those in as well. At the end, we'll ask for closing statements from each of the candidates. Now, it's also available on demand at any time on ycnnow.com. And yes, YCN programming is now available in both New London and Wilmot on Comcast. Okay, so we're ready to begin. We have invited all the candidates that were running, but of course it's the busy campaign season, so some of the candidates had other commitments tonight and weren't able to make it. But we are very happy to welcome the 4 candidates who are joining us tonight. To begin with, and before we even start the introductions, we allow anybody who can't be here, any of the candidates who can't be here, to give us a statement and have a person of their choice read the statement. So before we begin introducing these live candidates, we're going to start with a statement from Greg Sargent.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm reading a statement from Greg. And he says, "My name is Greg Sargent, and I'm running alongside Karen Ebel for our 2 state representative seats. We're committed to being issue-driven problem solvers who deliver common-sense solutions. We will represent our community with integrity, diligence, and responsiveness. Unfortunately, I'm unable to attend this evening's forum due to a long-standing out-of-state work commitment. However, I want to take this opportunity to share a bit about myself and why I'm running. I'm a lifelong New Hampshire resident, a graduate of our public school system, and an alumnus of UNH and Boston University School of Law. I've spent my career working for the betterment of our communities, first defending hospitals, doctors, architects, and engineers, and representing New Hampshire school districts, towns, and boards. From 2012 to 2019, I worked as an insurance adjuster and then as an in-house attorney for a New Hampshire-based insurance company, giving me firsthand experience in addressing complex legal and financial challenges. For the last 5 years, I've co-led Lamont, Hanley, and Associates with my sister. We employ 60 hardworking people in the mill yard of Manchester and have built a company recognized as a best place to work in collections and a Business New Hampshire top women-led business. Mm-hmm. My role involves ensuring employees' success, which in turn ensures a company's success. During my tenure, we have increased employee pay and our profit margin. As a business leader, I've developed fiscally responsible, practical solutions to address the challenges facing small businesses, skills I'll bring to the State House for Newbury and New London. I'm dedicated to lowering property taxes and preserving local control, strengthening the economy through job creation, small business support, and policies that address rising housing and child care costs, protecting reproductive freedom, ensuring individuals, not the government, make personal medical decisions, expanding housing opportunities and improving infrastructure, supporting a well-funded public education system and ensuring safe schools, ensuring clean water, air, and land, including cleaning up contaminated groundwater in New London and shoring up the Mount Sunapee wastewater lagoons, and promoting dignity and respect for all Granite Staters, free from unnecessary government interference. This election is about choosing leaders focused on real issues with practical solutions, and I ask for your vote on November 5th. Sincerely, Greg Sargent.
Okay, thank you, Karen. All right, we will begin with opening statements. We'll begin with Karen Liat-Hill, who is running for Executive Council.
Great. And I usually like to stand. If I stand and speak loudly, will you be able to pick that up on the microphone?
Yeah, I think we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Raise your hand if you can't hear her.
All right. Good evening. My name is Karen Leo Hill. I'm a 20-year city councilor and the former mayor in Lebanon. For the last 8 years, I've also served as Grafton County Treasurer. I'm very excited to be stepping up to run for Executive Council District 2, following in the footsteps of Cindy Warmington. On the campaign trail, I've been sharing the story of my mother, Lynn, who died when I was 6 years old. She had cervical cancer, the kind of cancer that's typically discovered in routine reproductive health care, the kind of health care that Republicans on the Executive Council have been voting to defund repeatedly. When my father was left with 3 kids under the age of 7, he was able to keep his small roofing business and our family afloat thanks to the help of Social Security. Later on, as a young single college student, my daughter Marina was born 10 weeks early, and I was able to go back to college with an infant and finish my studies thanks to the help of Medicaid that covered her 5-week stay in the neonatal intensive care unit. I know firsthand the power of government to improve people's lives. It's why I've dedicated my career to public service and why I'm so thrilled to have this opportunity to bring my skills, my knowledge, and my experience to the state level as executive counselor. For the last 20 years, I have been working on the most pressing issues facing our state, from helping to guide our community through the global economic crisis when I was mayor in 2008 and 2009, working alongside Governor Lynch, whose endorsement I'm very proud to have in this race, to fighting climate change, which has been one of my main priorities for 2 decades. I signed on to the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, and Lebanon has been a leader in the state on sustainability, including as a founding member of the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, which is already saving residents of New Hampshire millions of dollars. And this is the promise of what we can do when we work on fighting climate change at the state level. I've also worked on housing and childcare. In Lebanon, we are building a demonstration workforce housing development that's going to serve primarily municipal and school district employees. And through a public-private partnership with the Boys and Girls Club and working with our federal delegation, we're building a 200-seat childcare facility where more than half of the seats are reserved for low and moderate income families. This is the kind of work that I've done at the local level, and I'm excited to work on at the state level. And I'm excited to be on the ballot with Senator Prentice and Karen Ebel, State Representative Karen Ebel, and Greg Sargent, because I know that we are going to be able to work on these things together as a team. So I'm here to ask for your support on November 5th, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Sue Prentice is running for the state Senate.
I try to bring my own timer with me. So.
Yes, by the way, we have a timer sitting in the front row. If you see.
Oh, wait, I didn't see it. Did I do okay? Did I do okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, so the sign didn't go up, so I think that you're.
This is a warning, and this is a
This is the
All right. Okay. All right. We got it.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Again, my name is Sue Prentice, and I am currently serving as your state senator, and am here to ask for your vote to serve in my 3rd term as a state senator for District 5. I've come from West Lebanon, New Hampshire, and I've been serving these 15 communities through redistricting for the last 2 years. The first year was 9, now we're at 15. I was fortunate enough to inherit New London into the communities that I serve. So I'm really honored to be here with you tonight and see so many familiar faces. I am a mom, a paramedic, and a community leader. As a mother, I have one wonderful daughter, Phoebe Lowe. She's 27 years old. And what I know about Phoebe is that she will not have the same reproductive rights and be able to have the same control over her body and her decisions that I had when I was a young woman because of the overturning of Roe versus Wade via the Dobbs decision. I also had the opportunity to watch Phoebe thrive in a public school that was reasonably well-funded and equitable across the board. And so those are 2 perspectives that I've been able to bring to the work that I've done and will continue to bring to the work that I'll do. As a paramedic, I am a critical thinker and a problem solver. We have just moments to see problems, to figure out how to solve them and then work to do it. And in my time in the Senate, an example of something that I've done that actually, works for emergency medical services and actually pushes away from downshifting to your local tax dollars is increasing Medicaid funding for ambulance transportation. So you no longer have to pay the difference between what Medicaid funded and what the bill is. By getting the rate up to 100% of Medicare, it supports your local healthcare workforce, both at the hospital and in the ambulance. That's just one example. And as a community leader, just like I was going to say Executive Councilor Hill, but Councilor Hill, I served on the Lebanon City Council for 12 years, and for 2 of those years, I was mayor. I understand front and center what the importance of local government, that the people who know government the best are the people on the local city and town boards, city councils, our selectmen, as well as school boards, and that we have to be in a position in Concord to be supporting the work that you do and not overreaching too far. Preserving the character of your towns and your neighborhoods is very important to me. So I look forward to speaking with you more tonight and throughout this campaign, and I'm honored to be your state senator. Thank you.
Okay. Karen Ebel?
My name is Karen Ebel. I'm running for my 7th term for the district that includes Newbury and New London, and nobody is more surprised at that than I am, that I've been serving for 12 years. I've lived in this community for 35 years, and I raised my family here. I currently serve on the House Finance Committee, which is Division 1, and I call it the kitchen sink division because we work on the budgets for all the state agencies except for Health and Human Services, Education, and Transportation. And that means that I'm helping them with funding to do the work that they do for us. I helped negotiate the most recent bipartisan budget, and if elected, I'll work on the next one, which promises to be brutal, and we can talk about some of the reasons for that at some later point. I previously worked on public works and highways, working on the capital budget and the 10-year transportation plan. I've held a variety of positions during my time in the House, but most in particular, I served as Deputy Speaker, which is the number 2 position in the House, and I've served 2 terms as the Deputy Leader, the Democratic Leader pro tem. All of this is under different leaders. It's not unprecedented, but it's unusual, and I appreciate these leaders having the confidence in me that they have. During my time as Deputy Speaker, among many other responsibilities, I was in charge of converting the House to a remote operation, which was pretty good considering I'd never heard of Zoom before. Many of the changes we made, including live streaming legislative hearings, remain in place today. During the past 12 years, I've been involved in a great deal of legislation, some of which is the direct result of my engagements with my constituents and was the result of bipartisan coalition building, including improving the ability of disabled folks to vote with an absentee ballot, think Jesse Levine, transforming and greatly improving educational opportunities for students with dyslexia, think B.B. Casey, passing laws enabling towns to reduce speed limits to 20 miles an hour due to seasonal congestion, think Bunker Road, bringing the fight against Wild Goose Boat Ramp to a successful conclusion after decades, working with our towns, state agencies, perhaps too many people and groups to mention here, but including David Kidder and Dan Wolf. My most recent work involves solid waste and bringing the state up to the 21st century in terms of policy and waste diversion efforts. This has involved an incredible amount of bipartisan work and much coalition building to get consensus on a variety of measures, from food waste diversion to the creation and funding of a solid waste grant program. This spring, one of its conservative members declared on the Senate floor that I deserve the Legislator of the Year award for the work I did on my bill getting PFAS out of a variety of consumer products. And with that, I will terminate my statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Dorothy.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Dr. Dorothy Hitchmoth. Please call me Dorothy. That's what everybody else does. I have been living here in New London for 29 years. I am not a politician. This is my first run for the State House for Newbury and New London. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and my goal tonight is for you to get to really know who I am as a person, a little bit more about my background, and exactly why I'm crazy enough to run in the middle of running a very busy practice. A lot of you know me. I'm an eye doctor. I have a practice here in town. I've had a practice here in town for the last 5 years. Prior to opening the practice here in New London, I was with the Department of Veterans Affairs for 24 years. I'm very proud to say, and was very happy to serve our nation's finest for all those years. In my case, it was a chance to give back. I grew up all over the world. My father was career Army. I lived in countries that many have not visited, and I have seen what it's like to live in other places, and I know that we are lucky to live in such a wonderful, beautiful place, not just in the United States, but especially lucky to live in a place like New London. I accidentally drove through New London 29 years ago, freshly minted dock, pretty much by accident. And I'm driving along, and it was August, so of course it was exceptionally perfect, and I thought, what is this perfect place? I did not grow up in such nice neighborhoods. I do understand the struggles of people that are working and looking to get ahead and looking to get into a nice neighborhood just like this. My intent is to fight for people who work hard while ensuring that people who don't have the same opportunities get that chance. I would say that's fundamental in how I will legislate if I have the privilege of being elected. I have 3 boys. I should back up and say I get the question all the time: How are you gonna do this? How are you gonna serve in Concord and run a busy practice? The same as these fine ladies who are very busy, and I have a lot of respect for all 3 of them stepping up and serving for as many years as they have. As I said, I have 3 boys. They're 36, 29, and the most handsome one is here sitting in the audience, and he's 16. We have 2 amazing grandchildren that are 5 and 2, and I am really, really looking forward to creating a better world for them. I really want to honor those who have fought for what we have, and I am absolutely dedicated to making sure that we elevate the time that we're in, that we work together to bring people together, to solve problems in a way that is not divisive, in a way that is polite and kind and really represents what the United States really is all about.
All right, thank you. All right, now we'll open the floor to questions. Who would like to ask the first question? And we will rotate as we go along so that you're not always the first one having to answer the question. Are there any questions from the floor right now? Okay, well, fortunately, I got a few up here that are very interesting. This is for all the candidates. We'll start with Karen. Several bills propose to change zoning laws to require higher density. New London voters recently voted overwhelmingly against such a proposal in town. Are you in favor of overruling local control on zoning density?
Oh, well, we're diving right in, aren't we? As a 20-year city councilor, I have a deep respect for local government and for the importance of deferring to local priorities. I know that all towns are not the same. I think we all agree that we have a housing crisis in New Hampshire. It's a very serious crisis. I think that every town has a role to play, but I don't think that we all have the same role to play. In Lebanon, one of the things that we have been doing at our own choice is we've been updating our zoning laws to increase density in our downtown areas where the water and sewer infrastructure already exists. We've done things like decreasing the height restrictions so that you can build taller buildings in our downtown areas. So that's a way to build up instead of building out, because we really want to also, at the same time, we've been protecting our more rural areas. We want to discourage sprawl. We want to we want to really protect the rural character of Lebanon while also addressing the need for more housing, and by encouraging that to be in more density in the downtown areas. But I don't think that that's exactly the same thing that's going to be appropriate in New London or in Dublin or Keene or up in Littleton or Bethlehem. So I definitely respect that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to zoning, to the housing crisis, or to a lot of the other issues that affect each of our communities differently. And I will certainly have bring a great respect for local government to the role of Executive Council.
Okay, thank you. Sue?
Thank you. As I said in my opening statement, as a community leader, I've had the opportunity to serve locally as a city councilor and have a lot of respect for the decisions that town select boards, as well as city councils, whatever form of local government you have, you know your communities the best. It's not new news that we have a housing shortage driven by a low supply. It's an inventory issue. It's not just for renters, it's also for homeowners. And we're facing a time in our life when the great American dream, what I like to think many of us have, as well as my husband and I have been able to afford and put a roof over our head in West Lebanon, a nice little 2-bedroom ranch. I'm worried that that will be out of reach of many of our Granite Staters, because it is right now. Specifically to the question about density, and I think some of this leans back to House Bill 1291, which was actually looking to overrule local communities, overreach, as I consider, to actually add some additional language so that all the work that you had done here in New London to come up with an ADU process that worked for you, that would have been overruled by this particular piece of legislation. And there was one member of your community who called me probably every week, Mr. Epstein, how are you? So Mr. Epstein called me all of the time, and I assured him that I was on top of this. And I did. I stayed in touch with my other colleagues, as well as other communities, and ultimately voted against this because I wanted to allow you all to do what works best for you. The way we're going to solve this housing crisis is the way we've started down a path. We need to streamline the permitting process. We need to incentivize local communities to actually build in the areas and do the kind of zoning that works for them, as well as look at some different funding incentives and put more money in the Affordable Housing Fund. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
Well, as many of you may know, I served in New London on the planning board for almost 20 years, and I chaired it for 11. So I have a deep and abiding respect for local control, and I also have a great respect for all the difficulties that one can face when trying to pass zoning regulations that are sensitive to the issues in a particular town. So I have brought that sensitivity to Concord, and during the discussions here of the crisis in housing, I really have struggled with this top-down approach that people think that they have the answers that apply across the state, when really you have to be sensitive to the towns. And so I have voted against the top-down approach. Sometimes I've been a bit of an outlier, but I think it's really important to support what we're doing in our towns. So while I was on the Finance Committee, I worked very hard to try to get more financing to housing projects successfully. So there are many millions of dollars, including Invest New Hampshire, which you're familiar with now in New London. In fact, you might be getting a grant for about $600,000. That's one way of helping towns. But I think one of the things that people are missing in Concord is that what you need to support housing is infrastructure, and infrastructure is extremely expensive and challenging. And if there's support that we need for our towns, it's to support the infrastructure so they can build their zoning laws to complement the infrastructure that they have. And I know we're acutely aware of that in this town of New London at this time.
Okay. And Dorothy?
For me, this is simple. I'm a conservative constitutionalist, and I think that most of the time local control is best. I could go on and on about why I think that's the case. But I think most here where we live, most of us have chosen to live here for many, many reasons. And some want to maintain the way that we live, some don't, and that's okay. But that can be debated at the local level very successfully. Yes, things are complicated sometimes, and infrastructure does need to be built. But I also believe that people are smart, and they have the ability to come up with ideas for solving local problems best. I also, as a leader both in my profession and on legislation on the back end for 30 years in Washington, you can see what that's gotten all of us, know that you can borrow from other programs that have proven success. I'm a huge fan of that. I love to come up with new ideas, innovations, and borrow from those who have proven to do things well. But to be clear, I think local control is best, and I will stand on that principle on an ongoing basis if elected.
Okay, thank you. All right, any questions from the audience?
I would love it. I would love it if someone at some point might want to ask what the Executive Council does. Just saying.
Yes, Marie.
We recently had the prospect of having workforce housing, and our water and sewer department said they could not provide that. They needed to pay them, I believe, because there was contamination in the water from the cleaners in town. What can be done to expand the ability to provide water and sewer for these projects?
We'll start with Sue.
Great, thank you. I actually was putting my hand up because I'm happy to answer your question for everyone. I spoke a little bit about some of the incentivizing, instead of telling the communities what they need to do, incentivizing them and giving them the tools to help do this. So were two significant pieces of legislation that I co-sponsored. One was Housing Champions, and the other was Home-to-Bus. Both of them have passed, but Housing Champions in particular would provide grant funding for infrastructure for these projects, with the caveat that there was standardized training for planning and zoning boards in an order. And I mentioned earlier, we've got to streamline the permitting process. We need 60,000 housing units in the state, and we have a bottleneck. We're under 300 active permits at this time. So we've got to be able to streamline that, but we also have to be able to respect the character of the neighborhood. So answer to your question is, the Housing Champions would be one of the solutions. It incentivizes the funding for infrastructure for projects such as these, if a community wants to do it, and you have to meet some of the requirements, including training. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
She had her hand back up.
Is Housing Champions part of our government, or is that another?
Housing Champions is a state program that passed that respects relationships. It is about the state and the communities working together. And it passed not last year, but the year before, so it's in the process of being rolled out. So if your community wants to take part in it, you can. You're welcome.
Okay, Karen.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. I'm acutely aware of the issues that came up with this housing project, and it's really unfortunate the way it is all rolled out. Unfortunately, it's a very challenging situation. We have a water precinct that is independent from the town, and they operate with a board of commissioners. They have their own budget, and they have their own voters that support them. And you can't force the water precinct really to do anything, but you certainly can encourage it, and you certainly can work with them to try to find some grant money to try to expand the water precinct's opportunities. Unfortunately, the pollution situation, I don't think anybody really knew anything about until the wells were drilled at the hospital. I thought a lot about this, and it really seems to me that as we proceed with these housing opportunities, people should be focused first and foremost on the water that they can get and on the sewer that they can get, so they know right up front whether or not the infrastructure challenge is going to exist, so it's not happening at the end of the process. It's happening, the decision making is happening at the beginning of the process. But whether you do that by a piece of legislation, I don't really know. But I guess the other thing I would say is that I've used the unfortunate situation in New London to show people that the top-down approach doesn't really work, because these things all happen at the local level.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy.
So I think your question was, do we have the infrastructure to bring water for new housing? And I went to all of the hearings because I was very interested to hear that answer. And my conclusion is we do not currently have the infrastructure to bring additional water into the local area without spending a tremendous amount of money on infrastructure. And as all of you know, infrastructure projects are often on the backs of the taxpayers. So I think we're going to have to move forward very carefully, look at what that cost will be, and ask ourselves as a local community, can we afford this in the short and the long term, and collectively, how should we solve that problem? I agree that the contamination problem was surprising. Maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was surprising and unfortunate. And I will strongly support any legislation and be happy to propose legislation that helps protect the environment. I know that's not often seen as a conservative priority, but it is certainly one of mine. I had the benefit in pre-med to study in a lot of areas. I'm invested in a water company that is looking to figure out how we're going to survive with the water shortage that we actually are facing for other climate reasons. So to answer your question, I think it's going to cost a tremendous amount of money. And it remains to be seen how we solve that problem.
Okay, thank you. Okay, who else has a question from the? Me. Oh, sorry, Karen.
That's all right.
I always get mixed up with this. Yeah.
Infrastructure is definitely expensive, and to go back to Senator Prentice's point about bottlenecks, the permitting creates this bottleneck situation, but the lack of infrastructure in our communities also creates the bottleneck. That's the physical bottleneck. And it's natural that communities are leery of taking on additional infrastructure because it is so expensive once you take it on. And I think that part of the solution for housing on the broader level, which is what I'll talk about for a minute, since I think you've got the local particulars covered, I think we are going to have to find communities that are interested in expanding their infrastructure, but who might need help to do that. And I think the executive, a role that I can play on the executive council, there are federal funds available to states for different projects, and I think we'll see in a couple of weeks what the outcome of the election is, and I expect under a Harris-Walz administration, we'll see significant investments in infrastructure like we've seen during the Biden-Harris administration. So I think we're going to have some opportunities to leverage federal dollars over the coming 4 years, so that's my hope. And I think the Executive Council, federal funds that come through the state are voted on by the Executive Council to accept those funds. And another role that we can play is making sure that communities know about those opportunities so they can have the discussions about whether expanding infrastructure is the right thing for their communities, and if they want to, what are the resources available to them? So I think that's another aspect, another way that we can address housing infrastructure by addressing our water and sewer infrastructure, which is certainly a major constraint on housing.
Okay, thank you. Now, over here, yes.
To stay with Karen Hill, I wonder if you could review for me again just what the
Thank you for that question so much. The Executive Council is unique to New Hampshire. It's an additional check and balance on the governor. The state is divided into 5 districts, as you can see. Some of them are shaped very interestingly as well. The Executive Council is the most heavily gerrymandered body in the state of New Hampshire. It's kind of a textbook case. We happen to live in a very Democratic district, but the reason that they concentrated all of the Democrats into this district is to make these other 4 districts more favorable for the Republicans. And so the Republicans have a 4-to-1 majority currently on the Executive Council, and we'll see in 2 weeks if that continues. It just may well. When I talk about the Executive Council, I use the word CARS. It stands for Contracts, Appointments, Roads, and Services. So contracts, all state spending is voted on over $10,000, which is all state spending, is voted on by the Executive Council. They say the governor has to be able to count to 3 because you need 3 is the majority in a 5-member body. So contracts is a big part of the job. Appointments to all boards, state boards and committees, the commissioners of state agencies like Frank Edelblut, the Commissioner of Public Education, whose mission is to destroy public education, and maybe we can talk some more about public education tonight. Appointments to all judicial appointments also go through the Executive Council. And in the context of a super conservative supermajority on the United States Supreme Court that is overturning the role of the federal government in protecting our constitutional rights and civil liberties, these appointments to our state courts, especially our state Supreme Court, are more important than ever. R is for roads. The Executive Council is responsible for the state's 10-year highway plan, roads, bridges, trains, airports, public transportation. And lastly, services. A lot of the work is connecting people, whether it's individuals, nonprofits, or municipalities, with the right people in state government to get answers to their questions and access to services that they need. And so I kind of think of the Executive Council like a big city council for the whole state. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the floor? In the back there. I can't see the purple. Yes. You.
I have a question for Dr. Gordon. I know exactly where Dan Wolf stands on education freedom, but I would like you to, if you would, elaborate on your position on educational freedom counts and tell us what you think the pros and cons are of this program.
All right, I'm going to say that again just because people may not have heard. The question is about educational freedom accounts. Okay, and the pros and cons of the educational freedom program. Okay.
So we only have a couple minutes.
Right.
That's a big issue. Let me start by saying that I think parents know how their children should be educated best. And to restrict parents from having a choice, I think, is unfortunate. However, I also think that our public school system is important. Do I think that we can have both? Yes, I do. I think that this issue has been unfortunately politicized and unnecessarily so. I am going to work really hard to make sure that for those children who actually need something different than what we can offer in the public school, that their parents have the ability to chase after that. I am the product of a public school education. I was very fortunate to have done very well in school. I watched other children not have that opportunity. Now, I'm also a big outcomes person. If we're going to measure, we need to measure outcomes. We need to look for programs of excellence. So this is a little bit on the tactics. And for people who are doing things best, for those who are getting children to jobs and to college in a way that is good for them and according to their choice, we need to look at those and share. So I do not see this as a divisive issue, but one that we should all come together on behalf of children. They deserve it. They do not deserve the bickering and the divide that I've seen. So I'm ready to dive into that. I may not serve on the education committee if I'm elected, but I'm on alert. And I'll tell you, the people that I'm going to go to for guidance will be parents and teachers first.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to make a comment on educational freedom accounts? I know that question was just for Dorothy, but...
First of all, I'm a strong supporter of public schools, and I've been in the legislature long enough to have voted on many, many bills trying to expand the school voucher program. And many of them, in my opinion, fortunately, we've been able to stop. Many of you will remember that when the issue first arose, the idea was to give kids that are in public school who can't get the opportunities that they want and are low income the opportunity to go to an alternative place. At that point, and I can't give you the statistic, but the income level was quite low. Since that time, it's become increasingly clear that the interest is to really expand and expand and expand the school voucher program to the point that I believe undermines the abilities of schools to operate. We have, when Mr. Edelblut originally talked about education freedom accounts or school vouchers, he estimated that very few children would be involved and it would only cost a few $1 million. Well, we all know that at this point it's upwards around $30 million. We did put about $20 million for it in the budget, but that's an open-ended number and it can go far, far higher, and we don't have much control over it. We've tried to ensure that income tests are an annual thing for kids to go to get the money from the school voucher program. That's been shut down. We've tried to get the government, the state government, to be the one to oversee the administration of the school voucher program. They've shut that down. They have an independent operator that takes 10% of the money that's supposed to go into this program. There have been myriad other bills, and Senator Prentice knows many of them, so I'll stop here and let her continue.
Thank you, Representative Ebel. And I am, at this one moment, regretting the 2 cups of coffee that I drank today, because I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to sleep tonight. Representative Ebel was able to outline a lot of what we've been facing, and I have been serving for the last 4 years on Senate Health and Human Services. We have failed, Senate Education, we have failed to fix the underlying problem, which is fairness in school funding in New Hampshire. And so while that is fledgling, here we are moving public money into private education, and by virtue of an inventory of that money, which a local resident here, Maureen Prale, helped push me, and I helped to really flush out with the folks at the Children's Scholarship Fund and the Department of Education, how much money was actually being spent and in what categories it was being spent in. The majority of these dollars are going into Catholic education. Actually homeschooling first and then Catholic education. I went to Catholic schools, but my parents also paid their taxes. I went to school in Massachusetts. So I'm gonna wrap this by saying I do not support the current education freedom accounts, the school voucher program. We are driving money out of the public venue. We have absolutely no accountability. And every attempt, like I have tried again and again, to even just have basic income, eligibility tested every year. If you receive Medicaid, because this was originally for lower, moderate, and lower income families, if you receive Medicaid, if you receive SNAP, if you receive TANF, any of these other programs, every year there's a test, okay, to make sure you're eligible, except for education freedom accounts. No test. And then we learned this past summer, and as Representative Ebel said, we are 22 million plus, closer to 30 in this. The lack of oversight in this has led to, questions of misspending, lack of just the accounting principles, being able to find out exactly what's being done, and resistance from the Commissioner of Education to do the right thing, cooperate with the legislature, and answer these questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
I underscore everything that Representative Ebel and Senator Prentice just said about the education freedom accounts. You know, public tax dollars belong in public schools. I think, someone asked what the pro of the education freedom accounts is. I think the idea, the concept behind the pro of that is to give students choice. And I know, I was homeschooled for high school myself. Sounds like we've had some different approaches to education even at this table. And it's good for kids to have options. But public tax dollars belong in public schools. If people need to avail themselves of other options, that's great. They have that right to do that. But our schools in New Hampshire are severely underfunded as they are. And we have schools right nearby in Newport, in Claremont, that are really struggling. They face some of the highest property tax rates in the state, and they struggle with some of the greatest challenges in their schools. I was just in Newport last week. I think they said that 60% of the kids in the Newport School District are on IEPs. That means they need individualized special attention. And we have got to solve the biggest challenge facing our state is fair funding of public schools. And this is why we need to elect Democrats up and down the ballot in New Hampshire, because what we've seen over the last 30 years since the Claremont decisions is that when the Republicans are in control, they shirk the court's mandate, the constitutional requirement to fund an adequate education in New Hampshire. We need to have Democrats in control so that they will actually address this issue. And that's how we're going to also address lowering property taxes in communities that really desperately need tax relief. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have from the audience a very specific question about school funding. So I'm going to ask you, we'll start with Karen, but to try and keep this answer a little bit brief. Why did the legislature repeal the interest and dividends tax, and is there hope to get it back? A very small percent of citizens pay it, and it dearly needs to fund our schools. Would you bring it back?
Yes, I would. And I appreciate the question because I was going to get into this issue in some way because we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about education, we're talking about the environment, we're talking about so many issues, and all of those issues involve money. And so many of these issues involve revenue going to our state. And the Republicans, I don't want to get partisan about it, but they are driving to undercut the situation at the state level with revenue. And maybe it feels good to keep saying that, we need to cut taxes at the state level. I don't know how many of you actually pay state taxes. So what happens is so much of the burden for all of us falls on property taxes, and this is education, this is everything. So with respect to I&D in particular, school funding basically comes from the lottery and liquor and that sort of thing. So it's not a direct funnel from the I&D tax to school funding. But certainly it's a revenue situation for the state of New Hampshire. So I did some work on this, and 13% of, in 2020, the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute said that 13% of households in the state of New Hampshire pay an I&D tax. The I&D tax is not chargeable to people until you have $3,600 of income in I&D per person, or if you're two people, it's $7,200. This is exclusive of your KEO accounts, your IRA, it's just based on after-tax money. So I&D comes from liquid assets. And to pay $500 in I&D tax, you have to have about $350,000 in liquid assets to be taxed. So we're severely restricting the ability of our state agencies to do things from cyanobacteria
Karen,
to infrastructure
I'm
support.
going to bring you to a halt and ask you to answer the question yes or no. Would you vote to bring the tax back?
I would vote to bring the tax back. I did say that, but I also pointed out that it's not a direct relationship to education funding.
Okay, thank you. Dorothy?
Thank you. So I am a fiscal conservative. Let me just be clear about that. And as I thought would happen here, I would be at a table with folks that may not describe themselves the same way and that it would be a little uneven. So the reality is on the dividends and interest tax, 97 out of 100 people that pay that tax do not make a lot of money, and that's the bottom line. When it comes to how we fund state education, 72% of all states get their education through property taxes. So we're not alone. I'm not saying that that's the best solution or the only solution, but we're not alone. The cost of education in the public schools has gone up 90% in recent years. Only 10% of that has gone to teachers. So my point is we need to really take a look at spending. It's not that Republicans want to do harm to school children. It's not that Republicans don't want to fund public school. I mean, in fact, that sounds like an absurd premise. The fact is that we want to do so that we can continue to excel and pay for programs of excellence and include all children by keeping our taxes low at the same time. I mean, I have had families with young children, and I've sat in their living rooms, and the cost of energy is going up, the cost of everything is going up, and that's what's driving up housing costs, right? Including property taxes. So I'm a strong believer that we need to live within our means. We need to have a budget at the local level and the state level. And when we fix the budget problem, then we can spend. Otherwise, we're spending, and just like the federal government, we go into this massive bloated debt. And that's a fundamental problem, and those are the levers that drive how we pay for things in this country.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy.
Yep. The state of New Hampshire is 50th in the nation in terms of the state support for public education. We are last. And, it's interesting, the Republicans like to take credit for cutting taxes. They've cut the interest and dividends tax, $180 million. That is going, as Representative Evil talked about, going to a fairly limited number of people in the state. What the Republicans never do, it seems, is take credit for increasing all of our property taxes. Because that's what happens when the state fails to fund education adequately. When the state fails to deal with issues like homelessness. In Lebanon, we had to build a homeless shelter. And you know who paid for that? Local property taxpayers. When the state fails to make good on its promise to pay a third of the cost of retirement for our police and firefighters, our school teachers, when they decide to cut that promise that they made, it's the local property taxpayers that have to pick up the tab. And that's what's been happening. This is why we need to elect Democrats in November, because when they are in charge, then we're going to be able to address the main issues like fairly funding public schools in New Hampshire. And we're going to be able to address lowering the kinds of taxes that actually affect us. My mortgage payment, half of my mortgage payment is property taxes. And we cannot talk about affordable housing in New Hampshire without talking about property taxes. So this is a really important issue. I think we need to restore the interest and dividends tax cuts that were irresponsibly made by Republicans in the last session. And we need to the state needs to step up to its responsibility to fairly fund public schools.
Okay. Sue, did you want to come?
Oh, I'd be happy to. So I'm in support of, as it was phased out, in phasing it back in. I don't have an actual plan for the construction of it, but what I can share with you links very closely to what Representative Ebel had said, is there's not a direct correlation between the phasing out of the interest and dividends tax and education funding, but a direct correlation, but the causal relationship between these two things is revenue. And since I've been in the legislature, and I even remember this from being a city councilor, we had all this downshifting from the state to us, and so now I'm in the legislature where we are constantly seeing what revenue we have available to support programs that benefit good government, reasonable government, and the public are being cut away. So here we are when we're phasing out the interest and dividends tax, we could have actually used those dollars to help with the public education program. We could have used those dollars to fund school meals for hungry children. There are other sources of revenue that are outside of our control now that if we could bring those back in would be a benefit to public education. So if it's interest and dividends, if it's a revenue sharing on a business profits tax that primarily affects the larger corporations, not our small business owners, then those are ways to bring revenue into school funding. So I would support bringing it back. And I'd like to look at it if I was constructing it in a we phased it out and phasing it back in. But we have the need for those revenue dollars. And in this budget session, as Representative Ebel brought up in this budget cycle, we are going to be at least 7 to 9% down on revenue because of this, just to get started. There's things I want to do with the Medicaid program for moms and babies that I've already been told you're probably not going to be able to get to do that because we don't have the money. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to remind the panel and the audience that the League is a nonpartisan organization. We hold forums, not debates. We ask for your opinions and for how you are going to vote. I would ask if we could possibly restrict reference to Republicans this and Democrats that, and hear what we want to get to know you personally, because you are the 4 people we're voting on. So let's try and keep that in mind as we go on. We have another question back there. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Tony Brunel. I had the pleasure of working with young people as a teacher and a school administrator for about a decade in both public and private schools, some places here in New Hampshire. And I just wanted to say before I ask my question, I've seen the way that schools spend money. I've been a part of it. And I don't think it's necessarily a funding issue. I think it's more of a budget issue when it comes to local schools. But my question is, how, without having alternative routes of education or opportunities for children that may not be in the lowest of low in terms of economics and demographics, how do you make these public schools more competitive? Thank you.
Okay. This is round 3, so we start with Karen. Yes. Yes, we do.
I started before. Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to say that is a very difficult question for a non-educator. I think that we've all been working really hard to figure out that issue. I know the answer isn't always money, but it's difficult for schools to juggle everything that they have to do and plus provide alternative ways of teaching kids. I will say that I was very, very involved in working directly with B.B. Casey and many people on behalf of children who had dyslexia, which is a very large group of children who need alternative forms of instruction. And through the legislative process, we were able to develop systems that involved prior testing, support by a certain way of teaching dyslexic children that worked through the school system. So although one idea is that you need to send the kids to a different school, in some ways I think it's also beneficial to be working within the programmatic statutes and policies provided by the school system to do better for the kids that are involved. And as I say, I'm not as deeply involved with education as a lot of people are, but I know our State Board of Education really hasn't been as flexible or as open to working with public school systems as they might be to try to do better for these kids. And honestly, I think in our hearts we all want to do better for the kids, and as you have accurately disclosed, it's just really hard to figure out the ways. But that's one way I have worked on it, and hopefully more innovative analysis of how we teach schools will be helpful.
Dorothy.
Yeah, so I don't want to go backwards, but I just want to continue to underscore the fact that where we derive funds to pay for the programs that all of us have been talking about, I would encourage you to go and look at where we derive those funds and the percentage of the budget. You know, the interest and dividends is a couple percentage points, less than 1% going to education, and minimal property tax increase. So I like to talk in dollars and cents because that's the reality for most families. So keep that in mind. That's how I run the budget at my home as an executive in a hospital. That's how I had to run my budget, and that's how I run a small business. I will continue to do that at the government level with everybody's input in mind. You know, part of the education system in New Hampshire also involves college, right? Our college system. And the university system is operating at in a distinctly more efficient way than our public school system. I think we need to take a look at that. I have had discussions with some of the Senate leadership in this regard, and they are ready to roll up their sleeves and look at the programs of excellence that exist already in this state. We have a wonderful college system here in New Hampshire. So I just want to make those things clear. The genesis of most of the way that I will lead, the genesis of most of the way that I will help you live better in the state is by reducing the burden of taxes, not increasing it. And let me just say, when you reduce some of the burdens on the working class, you attract more people to live here, you lower housing costs, and you generate more revenue than you've ever had. It's a very fundamental principle in how you pay for things. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Good, thank you. Karen?
Yeah, I think the question was about how do we make schools more competitive. So I think we see persistent disparities between opportunities available to children across New Hampshire that depend a lot on zip code. So we know that there are some people who are born into towns that are able to afford a really great education. And then there are a lot of towns where the resources are not adequate. And because the state is not funding education, the local property taxpayers are burdened terribly. I think the biggest issue facing our schools, those schools, is the lack of resources. And there are things like, there are particular challenges then where kids are coming to school and they are not, they don't have enough food, they are facing serious challenges at home, and there's also we saw during COVID, the unevenness of the internet infrastructure across our state as well. So there are some major issues like that if we're going to educate our kids to compete in a modern economy, we have to address some of these disparities that exist across our communities. Because we need kids that graduate from Newport to be ready, just as ready to work and compete and be successful in their lives as kids that graduate from Hanover. So addressing the disparities, I think, is one way that we address this question of competitiveness. And I'll just go back to this issue about partisanship. The reason that I'm asking everyone to vote for Democrats is because in the State House and the Senate, we have seen votes that have been lost, major issues that have been lost by a single vote or less than a handful of votes. I'm talking about food for kids. I'm talking about reproductive freedom. That lost, codifying Roe lost in the Senate by 1 vote. And so that's why I'm talking about this, because it
Your time is
matters.
up, Karen, thank you. You'll see the sign there. Sue?
Every once in a while, I get the last word. And there's been a number of different perspectives offered, and I often talk about the opportunities available to our children shouldn't differ depending on a zip code, and that's already been addressed. Fair funding of education so that there are a variety of programs available, and also paying attention to our school buildings and our school facilities. Good playing fields, laboratory equipment, and now we're in this whole high-tech age. There's so many different things, but not every school district can afford these. When I was first running for Senate, I met up with a family in Cornish, New Hampshire, and this mom said to me, "We love our local school, but they only have one language program, and we just don't want, I'll use my daughter's name, Phoebe. It's great that Phoebe has Spanish available to her, but boy, if she were able to go to this other school, or we had more funding and we could attract more teachers, then she could take, say, Latin as well." And that always stuck with me. This past year in the Senate, there was a bill to install part-time teachers. And although it ended up dying in a committee of conference, the thing that was attractive to me about that, but we could not strike the proper balance, was that communities that, say, didn't have an arts teacher, didn't have a computer science teacher, didn't have somebody who could teach another language, they might have somebody who lived in their community who could pitch in and help, and that was the initial premise. But as this evolved, it became 36 hours a week. Although they could work up to 36 hours a week, which is basically a full-time job, and although they were subject to the same background checks and tied into the same code of ethics that full-time teachers were, they weren't required to have the same licensing and credentialing. So it was kind of like an end run that started with a good idea that was just another way to try to break down, work against public education and teachers. So I thought there was some value in that, but it just did not come out the right way. So I'll just wrap here by saying that conversation in Cornish, New Hampshire has stayed with me, obviously, until this day. I think that there are ways that we can do it, but we are looking at more creative patterns because we don't have the funding. Thank you, I got the red. All right. And I'm done.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on. I have 4 cards here on this one particular topic, and I think it's about time we get to it. I'm going to try to combine a couple of them. We start with Dorothy this round. What is your position on women's bodily autonomy and abortion, and would you support Planned Parenthood funding?
I'm not sure I know what Planned Parenthood funding means, but I will answer the question about reproductive health.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, let me be clear on that, because I know that's a really important issue, and it's an issue of our time. I would not vote to I would not vote to change the law that we have in New Hampshire right now, which allows abortions up to 6 months and goes even further and allows for exceptions in the 3rd term based on the life of the mother, the child, or other extenuating circumstances. I may be in the minority on the Republican side. However, I will fight very hard to make sure that women's choice remains, and here's why. There are 2 things that I know about abortion. Number 1, nobody wants to have an abortion. That's a fact. Find me someone that wants to do that, and we can have a different discussion. Number 2, if as a doctor, and I started out in pediatrics in Boston City Hospital in the 90s when babies were being born crack addicted. It was not pretty. I will tell you that abortions will not be safe. They will continue to happen if we outlaw abortion. So I want to be very clear that I will protect women's right in that regard. But I will also say that I would go further in making sure that women have better access than what they have right now, especially the women that are most vulnerable, to prevention. Prevention is a key part of reproductive health. It's very, very important. And I will also say one of the lowest abortion rates in the world is here in the United States. And that's because, comparatively speaking, we have really good access to health care. And I have been on many medical missions overseas, and I can tell you we're in a good place where we're starting now. I certainly don't vote in favor of going backwards. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
I believe that personal, private healthcare decisions are personal, private healthcare decisions, period. New Hampshire has its first restrictions on abortion. That was passed 4 years ago. And we hear, we've been hearing a lot about this in the gubernatorial election. But I want to point out the first restrictions that were passed, right now there is an exception for fetal fatal anomalies, and the criminalization of doctors has been removed. But there are still no exceptions for rape, and no exceptions for incest. Okay? New Hampshire has restrictions on abortion that are cruel and inhumane. On the Executive Council, so in New Hampshire, we have had, and what we've seen in the last 2 years, the Democrats have done the good work of making sure that doctors are no longer going to be criminalized for engaging in life-saving health care. But what we have seen is Republican legislators introduce 15-week abortion bans and 15-day abortion bans. The agenda is clear. There is an extreme anti-abortion agenda. It's happening nationally, and we see it here in New Hampshire as well. It's being introduced in the state legislature, and because in New Hampshire we also have the Executive Council, which is the part of the executive branch, the anti-abortion agenda is also being seen in the Executive Council, where Republicans on the Executive Council are voting to defund Planned Parenthood. By defunding Planned Parenthood, they're preventing mostly women across the state from having access to cancer screenings, STI testing, and even contraception. So this anti-abortion agenda is really important to stop both in the legislature as well as on the Executive Council. And on the Executive Council, I will be a firm choice champion for reproductive freedom. Thank you.
Okay. Sue?
Thank you. So I am also firmly in favor of and will be continue to be a champion for reproductive freedom. Healthcare decisions, reproductive healthcare decisions are made between women and their physicians or their mid-level practitioners, a PA or a nurse practitioner. We don't, as the government, belong in that exam room. Period. End of discussion. I have sat front and center in the Senate to see the first abortion ban in the state be put into place, and it was actually snuck into the budget. It wasn't, so that was how it came through. But setting that aside and looking at up to 24 weeks, there have been 3 to 4 different opportunities to change that, and they have been voted down. So if reproductive freedom wasn't really in jeopardy, then everybody, all parties would get around this. The night before the Dobbs decision was announced and it had been leaked, I was part of a group in the Senate and that worked to, we brought forward an amendment to codify up to the 24 weeks, up to that, third trimester. And when we did this, we actually had 3 Republicans who chose to vote with us. They were going to break with party ranks, they were going to vote with us, and at the last minute, one of them decided not to. So it was by 1 vote that night. Since that time, we tried to do it again on veto day, and we were voted down completely on partisan lines. And then we've seen, as have been mentioned, other attempts to do this that have, so the threat does really exist. And the last thing that I'll say is that funding family planning, which actually runs through the Executive Council, should be a priority, because in many of the rural areas, in particular of the state, the only places that families, that women have access to health care is at these family planning clinics where they can get STD testing, they can get treatment, they can get screening for cervical cancer, and that is being withheld from them because this funding has not been made available. We haven't been able to get it through the Executive Council. So reproductive freedom, pro-family planning funding for clinics. I'll support an executive counselor, the executive counselor that does that for us. Thank you.
Karen?
Well,
Karen.
I agree with what's been said here. I am very much in favor of total reproductive freedom. I would, in fact, vote to undo the current 24-week ban that was put in place by the budget. Along that same budget included education freedom accounts and divisive concepts. I will say I also very much support family planning, and we keep talking about revenue. Maybe $150 to $100 million doesn't seem like a lot of money, but when you're looking at family planning, if it's $1 million, it makes all the difference in the world as to whether or not you have the money to do that. In fact, I'm sorry, Karen, the criminal penalties remain in the statute. I've got the statute right here because I made sure to look it up before I came. The exclusions from the current ban are for fetal-fatal anomalies, as Representative Wolf knows very well because he helped with that. But it continues to be the fact that you're criminalized if you do an abortion after 24 weeks unless it's a medical emergency. And I know you all have read the horror stories of how far and how extreme a woman had to be ill before maybe she would be granted an abortion. She has to be practically dead on the floor. And there is no exclusion in New Hampshire in those circumstances for rape and incest. So I support totally reproductive freedom and family planning.
Okay, thank you. All right, we can turn this back to the audience. Anybody have another question? Yes, Dan.
I've been sitting here listening for an hour and a half about everybody saying we need more funding from the state level. 2 sentences. I'll give you 3 sentences. How is the state going to provide more funding? Just to ask you. I don't need a long explanation. 3 sentences.
Yes, and we begin up here with Karen again.
Oh, okay. 3 sentences. We haven't yet talked about legalization of marijuana. That was 1 sentence. We do have a statewide education property tax that is in existence that does not work in its current form, that should be reformed. It's the 2nd sentence. Earlier, I discussed briefly the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, which is saving ratepayers money, and I believe that tackling climate change at the state level and investing in things like solar or potentially offshore wind can also be another way to generate revenue at the state level, or at the very least, keep costs low.
Okay.
3.
All right, let's see if the rest of you can match that brevity.
3, 1, legalization of cannabis. We are an outlier in New England, and losing out on those sales will only continue to lose out on those sales. That is revenue that we are, that's money left on the table, sentence 1. Sentence number 2 is that we do restore the interest and dividends tax, and we bring that funding in. You know, we've talked about bringing it to education. There may be other programs, but it's gone. It can come back. Sentence number 2. And sentence number 3 is, and these are things I've already mentioned, we have a business profits tax that largely it impacts the targets and the big businesses, not our small business owners, and there have been cuts in that tax. If we could restore some of that and actually share it, we could bring some revenue back to the table. Those are just some of my ideas, and it's consistent with what I've been saying for 4 years. Thank you.
Okay, also good. Karen?
Can my sentence have a lot of commas? Semicolon. No, I mean, I guess one answer is to stop cutting the revenue sources that we have. I mean, there's just like this constant drive to keep cutting taxes. So that's one. From what I've observed in my work with the agencies, they really need to have some dedicated staff for grant writing opportunities. They're all working really, really hard, and they really need to do better with grant opportunities. And there's many opportunities out there that hopefully they can avail themselves of. And then the third is the marijuana legalization that's been mentioned already.
Okay, Dorothy?
I'm going to be brief. Craft legislation that brings new small business to the state of New Hampshire. Small business is how we employ our citizens, and it's the #1 driver of revenue. When you succeed with the working class, your revenue goes up. It's a very straightforward thing. It's been proven over and over again. I do not support, I'm going to be really careful how I say this because I think I've gone over my 3 sentences. One of the #1 drivers in healthcare right now is addiction. #1 driver in healthcare on the addiction front is alcohol. And right behind it are all forms of other drugs. So in the States, yes, it is a great way to raise revenue, but I think we need to tread lightly. I'm not entirely opposed to having a debate on this issue, so I might agree on some aspect of it, but healthcare is an enormous portion of the budget here in New Hampshire and everywhere else, and if you want to drive it up, bring on the addiction, bring on the mental health problems that come along with it. I have seen this firsthand. I have upfront and personal experience with this for over 24 years of working with veterans and other special populations. I suggest we're very careful with how we raise our revenue in that regard.
One very short question, and it really should be just a yes or no, because I did not know this. It's directed to the 2 state representatives, but you other ladies are welcome to weigh in. Your first vote as a representative will be to allow or to ban guns in Representative Hall, including the gallery for visitors. Will you vote to permit guns in these venues, and why?
As I have every time this opportunity has arisen before, I have voted against having guns in Representatives Hall. I think it's an unsafe practice, and it's particularly concerning in the gallery where we have 4th grade children. And I should say, and I realize this is not short, but the vote doesn't just affect Representatives Hall, it affects the hearing rooms, and it affects pretty much the State House complex. And guns have been dropped during hearings on kindergarten expansion with children in the room, and I don't think that's right.
Okay, thank you. Dorothy?
I want to make sure I understand your question. This is to ban all guns for all anybody entering the chambers, or just the state reps?
No, it is apparently coming up for Representative Hall, but as Karen points out, they can walk around anywhere in the building if they get into...
So again, is this for people that are elected officials who've been vetted and have criminal background checks, or is this for the entire public?
Entire public.
Okay. So if there's no vetting process, right? I mean, I'm generally a Second Amendment supporter. I'm an open carry supporter. However, in public buildings, if there's no way to vet this, and given the divisiveness in the country right now, I don't think I would be in favor of that. It's just not necessary.
Good. Karen or Sue, do you have an opinion?
Thank you. Yes, I have an opinion. I don't think that we don't, in the Senate, it's not allowed, it's not a conversation. I know in Representatives Hall, it has been for years. I would support not being able to carry a firearm in Representatives Hall. And one of the reasons, Dr. Dorothy mentioned is, that there's just no vetting of this. So we don't know who who has them. But one of the things that happened this year, I don't know if you heard about it, I was sitting over in Senate chambers, and oftentimes we're not supposed to use our cell phones, but I will, and I'll text a representative to say, hey, your bill passed, or what's happening with this. I got a text from a colleague of mine who said there are 2 state reps that are engaging, they're on the borderline of having a physical confrontation, okay? And so they both had firearms with them. So they were up against each other, in each other's faces, because they disagreed over it. And a large number of representatives in that room from both parties, doesn't matter, they got up and they left because it was frightening. So I hear that this is happening on just the other side of the wall. We have to be careful, unfortunately, in how things escalate. This was a potential that could have been very problematic. So I'm not in favor of firearms in Representatives Hall. And in fact, I think, largely in the State House and in the Legislative Office building. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Senator Prentice and I both have the distinction of being gun sense candidates, which is a recognition by the every town. What is it called? Every town, which is a gun violence prevention organization. And I don't know, maybe Representative Ebel is as well. I have testified regularly in favor of gun-free school zones. I don't think that guns belong on the floor of Representatives Hall or in the State House, and I don't believe that guns belong on school campuses as well. Lebanon High School experienced an active shooter situation where a parent was outside with multiple guns in their vehicle, and the kids were in lockdown in the schools, and it was horrifying. This was just about 6 months ago, back in the spring, and it was horrifying and so frightening. And there was legislation in the Senate that I think just a couple of days later I testified on, because I don't think that schools, I don't think that teachers should have to be making those decisions. I don't think that legislators should have to be afraid of what's happening if 2 of their colleagues disagree on something. Unfortunately, the gun safety legislation fails in the New Hampshire House and the New Hampshire Senate every time. But I will continue being a voice for gun-free school zones, and I support the legislators who have indicated that they also think that guns do not belong in Reps Hall.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we're going to start the round of closing arguments, and we're going to start with Senator Sue Prentice.
Timer on. Press the green button. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this forum. And thank you to the many residents from the Greater New London area who've come out to see us tonight. What I didn't say when I opened is what I'm going to say when I'm closing. I'm one of 6 children. I learned early in life how to compromise without compromising my principles. I bagged groceries when I was 16 years old, and I've continued to work my way through just sheer elbow grease up to the different roles that I've had, including being the first female chief of emergency medical services at the Department of Safety for the state of New Hampshire, and now serve as a role as the executive director of the American Trauma Society. I am not adverse to hard work. I serve on Senate Health and Human Services. I'm proud to bring my healthcare background there. I serve on Senate Education, and I also am a chair of 2 commissions. Commissions that have been established by the legislature, one that has to do with public health and one that has to do with mobile responses to behavioral health crises. In this last year, just this last year, I filed 14 bills and I moved 12 of them through, shepherded them through, largely in a bipartisan way, to the governor's desk. 2 that I'm most proud of. One is making available monoclonal antibodies that would prevent RSV, a very serious respiratory virus in children. Wasn't available to them before. It is now available to them in an environment that can be anti-vax, getting that work done took a lot of tenacity, and it took a whole group: private insurers, healthcare providers, legislators. We all got this done. I led that charge. Very proud of that work. Second thing I want to talk about is very quickly is the Momnibus. I've been part of an effort, and we'll be looking at doing Momnibus too. That's why I want you to send me back to expand postpartum Medicaid coverage for moms from rate that was 60 days. It's now 365 days for these low-income mothers that they are not eligible for the granted advantage, so that they can manage some of their addiction issues, and they can manage some of the depression issues and other postpartum issues that they just started to get preventative care on during their pregnancies, and it suddenly gets cut off. We also invested in community-based wraparound services, lactation consultants, doulas, donor milk, and we're going to move that forward next time to another level with Momnibus 2. I'm a hard worker. I ask for your vote, and I thank you for the opportunity. Okay. 2 minutes and 42 seconds. Done.
Karen.
All right. I don't have that timer.
Do you want me to hear you?
It's 2 minutes, though, right?
It is 2, so I'm just
Okay.
I went over.
All right. Thank you very much to the League of Women Voters. It's really marvelous that you always host these events, and I, for one, really appreciate it. I ask for your vote today so I can continue my work in this district's behalf. I think everyone who's worked with me knows that my heart and my mind is always with my district, and I'm a staunch defender of our towns, whether it's working hard to prevent the downshifting of tax burdens to property taxes from the state, making sure local control is maintained for zoning decisions, and in myriad other ways. I think you should know that I'm also known as a very bipartisan legislator in the State House. I'm very open-minded. I am as tight as anybody when it comes to fiscal conservatism. I like to make sure that our money is spent very carefully. But sitting on the Finance Committee, I'm incredibly sensitive to the needs of the state agencies, and people have expectations of their agencies, whether it's DES, cyanobacteria, or the Department of Education, or even the Secretary of State. There's a lot of people that want an electronic registration portal. We needed $500,000 to do that. And, you run out of money. So $180 million or whatever for I&D is huge dollars for general funding. If elected, I'll continue to work in supporting reproductive freedom and everybody's right to respect and dignity, working to keep our air, water, and land clean, promoting sustainability, fighting for public education and safety in our schools and communities, and opposing extreme voting restrictions based on specious fraud allegations. These are all of paramount importance to our quality of life here in New Hampshire, and most of them are vital to maintaining our freedom and our democracy, and I know that's something we all care very deeply about. And I thank you very much for your support in the past, and I ask for it in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dorothy?
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, this is my first run at political office, and I would like your vote because I'm confident, based on my broad experience in business and in healthcare and in life, that I will bring new ideas, alternative ways of driving revenue to ensure that we all have a better life here in New Hampshire. Yes, the environment is important to me. Yes, reproductive rights are important to me. Yes, education is important to me. I think there are some differences, and I would encourage all of you to look at the voting records of all of us in the future or here on the panel, so that you're sure that the voting record matches exactly what people represent. I strongly encourage that. I encourage you to go to my website. There's a lot more detail about my position on specific issues. There's a lot more detail on the website about specifically why I'm running that extends beyond whatever the yellow and red card tell me I have to do. And I'm asking you to give me a shot. I'm confident that I will do Newbury and New London proud and the state proud, and that I will dampen the divisiveness, and I will also promise that for the next league event that I will continue to follow the rules regarding nonpartisan chatter. So thank you very much, and I would really appreciate your vote on November 5th. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, Karen.
Great, thank you so much. What a nice evening it's been. I'm so excited to be on the ballot this November in this historic election. On the Democratic side of the ticket, the first 4 people in Executive Council District 2 are Kamala Harris, Joyce Craig, Maggie Goodlander, and Karen Leo Hill. And actually, the top 5 people, Sue Prentice as State Senate, and you've got Karen Ebel. There are so many women on the ballot this year. It is a historic election. I'm excited to be on the ballot. But I'm equally excited to be on the ballot with Sue Prentice and Karen Ebel and Greg Sargent, because I know that together we're going to be able to lower property taxes and fairly fund public schools. We're going to be able to fix and hopefully repeal the voucher program that's taking public tax dollars out of public schools. We're going to be able to tackle affordable housing and childcare, and we're going to be able to expand reproductive freedom in New Hampshire. The stakes of this election could not be higher. We have so much work to do, not to mention literally saving democracy. So I appreciate the time and attention that you've given us tonight, and I ask for your vote on Tuesday, November 5th, 2 weeks from today. Thank you so much.
Well, we thank all our candidates for coming tonight. It was certainly very interesting, and we hope that we have helped you making this very important decision. And 2 weeks from tonight, we'll all be watching the TV.